The long journey to rediscover my sister and myself. I have a sister who has been borderline abusive towards me for the last 20 years or so. We were never super close to begin with, but after I turned 12, I noticed a change. It started with mean comments about anything regarding me, or my friends, being snippy, and just acting like a mean girl in any shape or form she could. She seemed to hate me, and nothing I did made it better. The more I tried to make a connection, the more I was shot down. If I tried to ask her anything, she angrily responded that her life was none of my business. She once left me outside to freeze during the winter when she was supposed to pick me up from school for 4 hours. When both of her dogs attacked mine unprovoked, it was somehow my fault because, according to her, I coddled my dog. If someone wants more specific examples of the dozens of instances she was horrible to me, I will write more in the comments. After years of this, the anger transformed into mostly pretending like I did not exist. Whenever we were in the same room or gathering, she would just act like I wasn't there. She wouldn't look at me, greet me, or acknowledge me in any way. It was like I was just air to her. And at this point, our relatives noticed and asked why she was treating me like this. I told them I didn't know. My mom asked her why we didn't get along, and her answer was that you don't need to get along with everybody. No other reason was given. So, for years, I thought that I must have done something horrible to her to be treated like this. I just had no idea what. And after years of trying to be nice and being met with anger, I decided I had done enough after she called me a bad daughter and I left crying. Last May, however, we had big changes in my family. I won't go into detail because it doesn't matter and this is long enough as it is, but things happened and my sister did not handle it well. When I talked to my brother, we reflected on our childhood and how we all had equal opportunities to do things and have hobbies. He mentioned that my sister had said she would have also liked to start riding horses but didn't get to. And that was a light bulb moment. I started riding horses when I was 12, and apparently, she had also wanted to do so, but she felt we didn't have enough money for her to do so. Keep in mind that she never mentioned this to anyone. I begged my mom to go to lessons and dropped all my other hobbies, so we would have the finances to afford it. I also worked my ass off at the stables to earn free lessons, so my parents didn't have to pay for them for long. My sister never mentioned to anyone that she also wanted to take lessons, but instead started to resent me because I got to go, and because I was brave enough to ask for things. These are her words. She wrote a letter to our mother, explaining things a bit. After this reveal, I was so angry. I had blamed myself for years because I must have done something to make her hate me this much, only to find out it was something so stupid, and most of all, not my fault. If she had only told my parents that she also wanted to start riding lessons, we would have split the money between us. But no, she would rather hate me and treat me like trash. My parents try to tell me that we have to get along. They, of course, feel guilty too because if this was someone's fault, it was theirs, not mine. But it was me who ended up suffering. However, I drew a hard line. I had tried for 20 years, and unless she came to me and apologized directly, I would not have a sister anymore. On New Year's Day, she sent me a message. She wrote, "Since it's New Year, I apologize for the past. It has been a year of big change, and even if apologizing won't erase anything, it is at least something. Towards a new and hopefully better year." I felt this was a shitty way to say sorry for 20 years of pure shit. So I answered that while I was thankful for the apology, she would have to understand that I was not ready to forgive yet. She didn't answer anymore. My mom tells me to make nice, that it was huge of my sister to write me that message, and that she is trying. I can see that. But after the way she has treated me for the past 2 decades, that message feels empty, and almost like she is trying to clear her conscience with just that. After I tried for 20 years to have a sister, this feels like nothing. And while I will not hold a grudge for the next 20 years out of spite, I am hurt and need something more than a message that feels like an afterthought. The thing is, this isn't just about her letter or that half-hearted apology. It's about the years of emotional labor I put into trying to make this relationship work. It's about standing out in the cold waiting for her, crying myself to sleep over the horrible things she said, and sitting through family events where her deliberate silence made me feel invisible. It's about the years I lost blaming myself for something that wasn't even my fault. Her letter, while a step, is a baby step, and I need something bigger. I need acknowledgement, real acknowledgement, of what her actions did to me. And I need it on her initiative, Not because our mother pressured her into it, or because it's New Year's and she feels obligated. I've tried to explain this to my parents, but they don't fully understand. They're older now, and I know they're desperate to see us reconcile, to feel like they haven't failed as parents. But I've told them this isn't about them. This is about me and her, and if she truly wants to rebuild something, she needs to come to me on her own terms and with genuine intent. I'm tired of being the one to bend and make compromises, only to get hurt all over again. What hurts the most is that even now, after all this, I still want to have a sister. I want to believe that there's a path forward, but I can't be the only one walking it. If she truly wants to mend things, she'll have to meet me halfway. And until she does, I'll protect myself first. I owe myself that much after everything. After my sister's apology message on New Year's Day, I found myself caught in a loop of frustration and reflection. It wasn't as if I hadn't imagined this moment 1,000 times over the years. I had, but the reality of it felt hollow, almost surreal. Her words, typed out in that short message, lacked the weight of the years they were supposed to address. Was this really her attempt at mending the decades-long rift between us? Or was it just a way to ease her own guilt without delving into the pain she'd caused me? The days that followed were a blur of emotions: anger, sadness, exhaustion. Every time I replayed her message in my head, I felt the same gnawing emptiness. It has been a year of big change, she had said. But for whom? Certainly not for me. For me, every year felt like an extension of the last, tied down by the emotional scars her actions had left behind. What change had she experienced that made her suddenly feel compelled to reach out? I wanted to ask her, to demand answers, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed silent, letting the hurt simmer beneath the surface. My parents, of course, saw this message as a victory. My mother, especially, was relentless in her insistence that I respond more positively. "She's trying, isn't she? Can't you see that?" she said one afternoon, her voice tinged with a mixture of hope and frustration. I could see it in her eyes, the desperate desire for harmony, for some semblance of familial peace before it was too late. But what my mother didn't understand, what she couldn't understand, was that this wasn't about a simple apology. It wasn't even about my sister's words. It was about the years I had spent feeling like an afterthought, like I didn't matter. An apology, no matter how well-intentioned, couldn't undo that. It couldn't erase the memory of standing outside in the freezing cold, waiting for her to pick me up. It couldn't take back the humiliation I felt when she mocked me in front of our friends, or the countless times she dismissed me with an angry sneer. Still, the thought of completely cutting her off felt impossible. Despite everything, there was a part of me that still wanted to hold on to the idea of a sister, even if the reality of it had been so painful. I found myself scrolling through old family photos, searching for some fragment of a memory that didn't hurt. There were a few moments where we were smiling side by side, where the distance between us didn't feel so insurmountable. But even those memories felt tainted now, overshadowed by everything that came after. One night, unable to sleep, I opened a blank document on my laptop and started to write. I wasn't sure what I was trying to accomplish. Maybe it was just a way to get the thoughts out of my head, to give them form so they didn't feel so overwhelming. I wrote about the day I started writing lessons, how excited I was to finally convince Mom and Dad to let me pursue something I was passionate about. I wrote about the hours I spent at the stables, cleaning stalls and grooming horses in exchange for lessons. And then I wrote about my sister's resentment, about how it had festered in silence until it erupted into cruelty. By the time I finished, the document was a mess of half-formed thoughts and raw emotions, but it felt cathartic in a way. For the first time, I felt like I was starting to piece together the puzzle of our fractured relationship. It wasn't complete, and it certainly wasn't pretty, but it was a start. In the weeks that followed, I found myself returning to that document, adding to it whenever the memories felt too heavy to bear. I wrote about the time she ignored me at my birthday party, the time she laughed when I tripped and fell in front of our friends, and the time she called me a bad daughter, leaving me in tears. But I also wrote about the moments of connection, however fleeting they were. I wrote about the time we watched movies together on a rainy afternoon, laughing at the cheesy dialogue. I wrote about the time she helped me with my homework when I was struggling, her patience a stark contrast to the anger that usually defined our interactions. Those moments were rare, but they were there, and acknowledging them felt important. They were a reminder that, despite everything, there was a part of her that cared. Or at least, there had been. As I wrote, I began to wonder if my sister had her own version of this story. What would her document look like? Would it be filled with resentment and jealousy, or would it reveal vulnerabilities I had never considered? I realized that, for all the pain she had caused me, I didn't really know her. Not in the way siblings are supposed to know each other. Our relationship had been defined by distance and hostility for so long that the idea of understanding her felt almost foreign. One day, I decided to share the document with my therapist. I had been seeing her for a few months, mostly to work through the anger and sadness that my sister's actions had left behind. She read through it carefully, her expression thoughtful as she turned each page. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "This is a powerful account of your experience, but I wonder if there's more to the story." I bristled at her words, feeling defensive. "More to the story?" I repeated. "She's been awful to me for years. What more is there to know?" "I'm not saying her behavior is excusable," my therapist said gently. "But relationships are rarely one-sided. Have you ever asked her about her perspective?" I wanted to scoff at the suggestion. Why should I have to ask her anything? She was the one who had hurt me, not the other way around. But as the days passed, her words lingered in my mind. I started to wonder if there was something I was missing, some piece of the puzzle that could help me make sense of everything. Eventually, I decided to reach out to my brother. He had always been the neutral party in our family, the one who managed to maintain a relationship with both of us despite the tension. I asked him if he had any insight into why my sister had treated me the way she did. "I think she was jealous," he said after a moment of thought. "Not just about the writing lessons, but about how confident you were. You always knew what you wanted and went after it. I think that intimidated her." His words caught me off guard. I had never considered myself particularly confident, especially not as a child. But as I reflected on his words, I realized there might be some truth to them. My sister and I had always been opposites in many ways. I was outgoing and assertive, while she was more reserved and cautious. Perhaps her resentment wasn't just about the horses. Perhaps it was about something deeper, something neither of us had been able to articulate. The realization didn't make her actions any less hurtful, but it added a layer of complexity to the story. It made me wonder if there was a path forward, a way to bridge the gap between us. But for now, that path remained unclear, shrouded in the shadows of our shared history. In the months following the exchange with my sister, life seemed to settle into a strange rhythm. The apology she sent lingered in my mind, not as a source of peace, but as a question mark. What was she expecting? Was it closure for her? Or was it an invitation for me to reach out and do the work she had avoided for 2 decades? The ambiguity gnawed at me, and I couldn't help but feel that it was designed to shift the responsibility onto me. I threw myself into work and hobbies to keep my mind occupied. The barn became my sanctuary again, much like it had been when I was younger. The smell of hay, the sound of horses moving in their stalls, and the repetitive motions of mucking out and grooming provided a strange kind of solace. It was the one place where I didn't have to think about the messy dynamics of my family. Here, everything was simple. Hard work, clear results, and the quiet understanding between me and the animals. But even in the barn, memories of my sister crept in. I'd find myself thinking back to the time she had visited me there, a rare occurrence. I had been so excited to show her around, to share this part of my life with her. I remember her walking through the stables with a look of detached curiosity, making polite comments but clearly uninterested. At the time, I had brushed it off as just her personality, but now I wondered if that visit had been harder for her than I realized. Was she suppressing her jealousy even then, or was she trying to connect in her own way, only to feel out of place? One evening, as I was brushing down one of the horses, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Your sister mentioned she'd like to see you. Maybe have coffee or lunch. What do you think?" I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. The idea of sitting across from her, trying to navigate years of pain and resentment in the span of an hour, felt overwhelming. But there was also a flicker of curiosity, a small part of me that wondered if this could be the start of something different. I typed and erased my reply 3 times before finally settling on, "I'll think about it." The next few days were consumed by this decision. My therapist's words about perspective echoed in my mind, but so did the countless memories of being hurt and dismissed. Could I really sit across from her and not bring all of that baggage with me? And even if I could, what would be the point? What would we even talk about? Eventually, I decided to write her a letter instead. I thought that maybe if I put my thoughts down on paper, it would help me process everything. I didn't plan to send it. It was more for me than for her. The words came slowly at first, but as I wrote, they began to flow more freely. Dear, I've thought a lot about your message on New Year's. I've thought about the years we've spent barely speaking, the times we've hurt each other, and the space that has grown between us. I've tried to understand why things turn out the way they did, and I've struggled to make sense of it all. You said in your message that apologizing won't erase anything, and you're right, it won't. But it's not erasing the past that I need. It's acknowledgement. I need to know that you see the pain your actions caused me, that you understand what it felt like to be treated as if I didn't matter. I need more than a generic apology. I need something real. I'm not writing this to blame you or to make you feel bad. I'm writing this because I've spent years carrying the weight of this relationship on my own, and I can't do it anymore. If we're going to move forward, it has to be a two-way street. I'm willing to try, but only if you are too. Sincerely. When I finished, I read the letter over several times. It felt raw and honest, but it also felt incomplete. There was so much more I wanted to say, but I didn't know how to put it into words. I tucked the letter away in a drawer, unsure if I'd ever revisit it. A few weeks later, my mother called. She sounded excited, almost giddy, as she told me that my sister had been talking about wanting to rebuild our relationship. She's been going to therapy, she said. She's really trying to work on herself. I didn't know how to feel about this news. On one hand, it was encouraging to think that she might be taking steps to address her behavior. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was too little, too late. Why had it taken her so long to get to this point? Why did I have to endure 20 years of hurt before she decided to make a change? Despite my reservations, I agreed to meet her. We arranged to have coffee at a small cafe halfway between our homes. The day of the meeting, I felt a mixture of anxiety and dread. I arrived early, taking a seat near the window where I could watch for her. When she walked in, I was struck by how different she looked. She seemed older, more tired, but there was also a softness to her that I hadn't seen before. The conversation started awkwardly, filled with small talk and long silences. She seemed nervous, and for the first time, I realized that she might be just as unsure about how to navigate this as I was. After a while, she brought up the New Year's message. I know it wasn't enough, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just didn't know how to say everything I wanted to say. I looked at her, searching for any signs of insincerity, but she seemed genuine. What do you want to say now? I asked. She took a deep breath and began to speak. For the first time, she talked about her jealousy, about how she had felt overshadowed and overlooked. She admitted that her anger toward me had been misplaced, and that she regretted the way she had treated me. She didn't make excuses. She simply laid it all out, raw and unfiltered. As I listened, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Her words didn't erase the past, but they did something I hadn't expected. They opened a door. It was a small, tentative step, but it was enough to make me think that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Still, the path ahead wasn't clear. There were years of pain to unravel, wounds that wouldn't heal overnight. And while her words were a start, they were just that, a start. What came next would depend on both of us, and I wasn't sure if we were ready for that journey. After our first meeting at the cafe, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my mind. It was like examining an old wound that had finally been exposed to light. For the first time, my sister had acknowledged some of the pain she had caused, and while her words didn't erase the scars, they offered a faint glimmer of hope. But hope, I had learned, was a fragile thing, easily shattered, easily lost. Over the next few weeks, our interactions remained sporadic. She would send the occasional text, often just a simple "How are you?" or a photo of something that reminded her of our childhood. I wasn't sure how to respond most of the time. The messages felt foreign, like they were coming from a stranger rather than someone who had once been such a significant part of my life. Still, I responded politely, cautiously, not wanting to shut the door completely, but also wary of opening myself up too much. One day, she called. Hearing her voice on the other end of the line was jarring. It had been years since we'd spoken on the phone, and the sound of her voice brought back a flood of memories, some good, most not. She sounded hesitant, as if she wasn't sure I would even answer. I was thinking, she began, maybe we could get together again. Just the two of us. I feel like there's still a lot we need to talk about. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. There was a part of me that wanted to say no, to protect myself from the potential hurt that might come with opening up old wounds. But there was another part, a smaller, quieter part, that wondered if this could be the beginning of something different. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a park this time, a neutral space where we could walk and talk without the pressure of sitting across from each other. The weather was mild, the kind of day that hinted at the changing of seasons. As we walked, she started talking about her therapy sessions, about how she had been working through her own insecurities and childhood experiences. "It's strange," she said, "how much you can block out without even realizing it. There were so many things I didn't even know I was holding on to, but the more I unpack them, the more I see how much of it was about me, not you." Her admission caught me off guard. For so long, I had believed that her anger and resentment were rooted in something I had done, some flaw in me that had made me unworthy of her love. To hear her say that it wasn't about me felt both validating and disorienting. It was as if the foundation of my understanding of our relationship had shifted, leaving me unsteady. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully, "but it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't change how it felt to be on the receiving end of it all." "I know," she replied, her voice tinged with regret. "And I'm not expecting you to just forgive me overnight. I know I have a lot to make up for. I want to try, if you're willing." The vulnerability in her words was palpable. For a moment, I saw her not as the person who had hurt me, but as someone who was also struggling, someone who was trying to navigate her own pain and mistakes. It was a perspective I hadn't allowed myself to consider before, and it left me conflicted. Could I let go of the anger I had held on to for so long? Could I find a way to rebuild something with her, even if it wasn't the relationship I had once hoped for? Our walk ended without any concrete resolution, but it felt like a step in the right direction. For the first time, it felt like we were both trying, tentatively, cautiously, to find a way forward. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on the complexities of sibling relationships. There was a strange dichotomy in the way I felt about her. On one hand, I was still angry and hurt. On the other, I couldn't deny the lingering desire to have a sister. I wondered if this was how she felt too, caught between the past and the possibility of something new. One evening, I decided to revisit the letter I had written but never sent. Reading through it, I realized that while it captured a lot of my feelings, it also felt incomplete. There were things I hadn't said, emotions I hadn't fully explored. I opened my laptop and began to write again, this time with a clearer sense of what I wanted to say. "Dear, I've been thinking a lot about our recent conversations and the steps we've both been taking to try and mend our relationship. I won't lie, it's been difficult for me to let go of the anger and hurt I've carried for so long. But I'm starting to realize that holding on to that anger isn't helping either of us. It's just keeping me stuck in the past. That said, forgiveness isn't something I can give lightly. It's not a switch I can flip or a gift I can hand over without thought. Forgiveness, for me, has to be earned. It has to come from a place of understanding and acknowledgement, not just words but actions that show you truly want to make things right. I know you've been working on yourself, and I want you to know that I see that. I see the effort you're making, and I appreciate it more than I can put into words. It gives me hope that maybe we can find a way to move forward, even if it's slow and messy and complicated. But I also need you to understand that this process isn't just about you or your journey. It's about us. It's about the relationship we both lost, and the one we're trying to rebuild. And that takes time. It takes patience and honesty, and a willingness to confront the hard truths. I'm willing to try, if you are. I'm willing to take this one step at a time, to see where it leads. But I need to know that you're truly committed to this, not just for your own sake, but for mine as well. Sincerely. When I finished, I felt a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know if I would ever send the letter, but writing it felt like a step toward healing for myself, if not for our relationship. As the days turned into weeks, our conversations continued. They were slow and cautious, each one a tentative step forward. There were moments of connection, small glimpses of the sister I had always wanted her to be. But there were also moments of doubt, times when the weight of the past felt too heavy to overcome. And through it all, I reminded myself that this was a journey, not a destination. That even if we never fully repaired what was broken, the act of trying was, in itself, a kind of progress. The weeks stretched into months, and my sister and I continued to navigate the fragile, tentative path we had begun. Each interaction felt like walking a tightrope, balancing between past pain and the hope of something better. There were moments of progress, an unexpected laugh, a shared memory, a glimmer of understanding, but there were also setbacks. Old wounds have a way of reopening when least expected, and ours were no exception. One day, after a particularly heated argument about a family event, I found myself wondering if all of this effort was worth it. Could we truly rebuild something meaningful after so many years of distance and resentment? Was it even possible to forgive her, or was I fooling myself into believing that people could change? It was during one of these low moments that my mother called. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as she told me that my sister wanted to invite me over for dinner. She says she wants to talk. My mother explained. Really talk. She's been working on this for a while now. Part of me wanted to decline, to protect myself from the possibility of more disappointment. But another part, the part that still longed for a sister, couldn't ignore the significance of her reaching out. So, with equal parts hope and trepidation, I agreed. When I arrived at her home, I was greeted by the faint smell of something cooking, something that, to my surprise, reminded me of our childhood. She had made our grandmother's stew, a dish we both loved but hadn't had in years. The gesture caught me off guard, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of warmth. We sat down at the table, the silence between us heavy but not unbearable. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "About the things I've done, the way I've treated you. I'm not proud of who I was back then, and I'm sorry, truly sorry." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, they felt real. Not an afterthought, not a half-hearted attempt to clear her conscience, but a genuine acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. She continued, talking about her insecurities, her jealousy, and the ways she had projected her own struggles onto me. She didn't make excuses. She owned her actions fully and without deflection. "I know I can't undo the past," she said, her voice breaking. "But I want to try to make things right. If you'll let me." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The anger and hurt I had carried for so long didn't vanish instantly, but in that moment, I felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was the beginning of something close to it. "I appreciate what you're saying," I said carefully, "and I'm willing to try, but this isn't going to be easy. It's going to take time for both of us." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I'm ready for that." The rest of the evening was spent reminiscing about our childhood, laughing about the absurd things we used to do, and acknowledging the moments of connection that had been buried under years of resentment. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a fragile, hopeful start. In the months that followed, our relationship continued to evolve. There were setbacks, of course, moments when old habits resurfaced or when misunderstandings threatened to derail our progress. But each time, we found our way back to the commitment we had made that night over our grandmother's stew. Slowly, the walls between us began to come down. One day, as we walked together through the park, she turned to me and said, "Thank you for giving me another chance. I know I didn't deserve it, but I'm so grateful you did." I looked at her, seeing not the sister who had hurt me, but the sister who was trying, who was showing up, who was doing the work. "I'm grateful, too," I said, "for both of us." It wasn't a perfect ending. Life rarely offers those, but it was enough. Our relationship would never be the same as it might have been if things had been different from the start, but it was something new, something we were building together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a sister again,